guardian of the highway. The roar of the engine filled the cab of my tow truck, a comforting symphony after a night of nonstop calls. It was just past 3 a.m., the witching hour for stranded vehicles. My phone buzzed, another lifeline thrown into the darkness. This call was different. It wasn't your average flat tire on a deserted road. This was an insurance tow, a woman named Hannah stranded on the highway with a late model car. Normally, I wouldn't venture so far out of town, but the drop-off location was a dealership a stone's throw from my apartment, a welcome perk on this long and tiring night. As I neared the designated spot, a familiar pattern of flashing lights flickered ahead. But alongside Hannah's sleek car was another, a dark, unassuming sedan that sat silently, casting a long shadow across the shoulder. A flicker of annoyance sparked within me. Dealing with double-parked cars was a minor nuisance in my line of work. I pulled behind both vehicles, the standard protocol for tow truck drivers. Stepping out, I was greeted by a sight that made the annoyance morph into something else entirely. There, standing beside Hannah's car, were two figures, a young woman in her early 20s, dressed like a butterfly caught in the wrong storm, and a man, a stark contrast in his dark hoodie and worn jeans. They were close, too close. The man leaned in, his voice a low murmur, while Hannah stood stiffly, arms crossed, her face an unreadable mask. It was the picture of unease. Introducing myself, I noticed them pull apart, a brief flicker of tension dancing in the air. "You Hannah?" I queried, addressing the woman directly. A hesitant nod confirmed it. "Yeah," she started. But before she could elaborate, the man chimed in. "Just a minor fuel issue," he interjected, a touch too quickly. "Easy fix. This tow truck driver can just drop it off at the commuter lot up ahead, right?" My internal alarm bell started to clang. The commuter lot wasn't the agreed-upon destination, and the detour would add precious miles to my already long night. More importantly, something about the man's tone rubbed me the wrong way. "Actually," I explained, "the original drop-off was the dealership down the way. It's closer and better equipped to handle any problems." The man's smile turned thin, a hint of something menacing flickering in his eyes. "Look," he said, his voice hardening, "you just need to take it where I tell you." We locked horns. Minutes bled into an eternity as we argued, the tension growing thicker with each passing second. Then, his facade crumbled. "She doesn't get a say in this," he spat, pointing at Hannah, a raw edge creeping into his voice. Fear clawed at my throat. This wasn't a disagreement. It was a power play. Taking a gamble, I turned to Hannah, a silent plea in my eyes. Gone. Where moments ago the young woman stood, there was only empty space. My heart hammered against my ribs. A split second later, I felt her presence behind me, her voice a chilling whisper. "Don't listen to him," she breathed, her words laced with terror. The realization hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't a stranded driver and a helpful stranger. This was a predator and his prey. Whipping around, I faced the man. His eyes widened in surprise, the predator momentarily caught off guard. "Get away from her," I growled, channeling every ounce of authority I could muster. He opened his mouth to retort, but the threat died in his throat. He seemed to shrink, the menacing aura dissipating. With a muttered curse, he turned and slunk towards his car. I watched him go, the adrenaline slowly draining from my body. Shakily, I turned to Hannah, ushering her towards the tow truck. As we drove, tears streamed down her face. She recounted how the car had stalled on the highway, and how this man had materialized out of nowhere, his help quickly morphing into something sinister. By the time we reached the dealership, a pale dawn was breaking. Reunited with her worried parents, Hannah embraced me tightly, a silent thank you for the rescue. They pressed a $20 bill into my hand. their gratitude palpable. Driving away, the experience left a bitter aftertaste in my mouth. The hero role I daydreamed about felt hollow. Fear had been my close companion, not courage. But amidst the fear, a flicker of something else remained. A quiet determination. I wasn't a superhero, but I might be a deterrent. Word of mouth traveled fast in the towing community, and soon, every driver knew about the incident on the highway. We became extra vigilant, checking back with stranded women, keeping an eye out for suspicious characters. Weeks turned into months, and the unsettling encounter faded into a memory, a reminder of the darkness that sometimes lurked on the fringes. Then one rainy night, the dispatcher's voice crackled to life. "Tow needed on the highway," she said. "Woman stranded, late model car. Sounds like a fuel issue." A jolt of adrenaline shot through me. Could it be? The address was on the same stretch of highway, the same desolate stretch where I'd encountered Hannah. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. It could be a coincidence, but something deep within me gnawed at the possibility. As I neared the location, the flashing lights confirmed my worst fears. There, parked haphazardly on the shoulder, was a familiar dark sedan, and beside it, a lone figure, a woman in a shimmering dress, drenched by the rain. My heart hammered against my ribs as I pulled up behind them. This time, however, I wasn't alone. The dispatcher, alerted of my concerns, had discreetly notified 2 patrol cars. They pulled up moments after I stopped, their flashing lights casting an eerie glow on the scene. The woman, shaken but resolute, told a story remarkably similar to Hannah's. The man, caught off guard by the police presence, stammered and mumbled incoherently. He was apprehended and questioned, but without concrete evidence of wrongdoing, he was eventually released. Frustration gnawed at me, but seeing the relief in the woman's eyes, another damsel saved, another predator thwarted, offered a quiet satisfaction. Perhaps I wasn't a superhero, but I was a protector, a guardian of the lonely stretches of road. And that, in the dead of night, felt like enough. Trapped on the late bus, the fluorescent lights of the bus station buzzed overhead, casting a sterile glow on the worn plastic seats. Rain lashed against the windows, drumming a relentless rhythm that mirrored the pounding in my chest. My car had died on the highway, leaving me stranded and forced to take the bus home for the first time in years. I buried myself in a book, desperately trying to ignore the gnawing anxiety that always seemed to accompany public transportation. That's when I saw him. A man, easily in his late 50s, emerged from the shadows, his clothes hanging loosely from his gaunt frame. His hair was matted and greasy, and a thick beard obscured half his face. He reeked, an acrid mix of sweat and something else, something deeper and more unsettling. He shuffled towards me, his gaze darting nervously around the station. With a sigh that rattled his thin frame, he sank onto the seat beside me. My stomach lurched. There were plenty of empty seats, yet he'd chosen this one. Before I could even think, he started muttering, a low, rhythmic chanting under his breath. It was unintelligible, yet strangely hypnotic. I forced myself to focus on my book, the words blurring before my eyes. Then, he started rubbing his hands together, the sound like sandpaper scraping concrete. The hairs on the back of my neck prickled. Panic surged through me. I couldn't stay here. Making a show of checking the bus schedule, I rose abruptly and weaved through the sparse crowd to a bench further down the station. I settled in, my back ramrod straight, trying to project an air of confidence I didn't feel. But the chanting followed me, a chilling whisper that seemed to burrow into my skull. Just as I began to relax, a dark shape loomed in the corner of my eye. It was him, the man from before. He approached with a silent, lumbering gait and plopped down beside me, even closer this time. The chanting had escalated into a feverish mumble, punctuated by nervous twitches and darting eyes. Fear choked me. There were people around, yet I felt utterly alone. My mind raced with options. Should I ask someone for help? But what would I say? The thought of drawing attention to the situation sent shivers down my spine. Minutes stretched into an eternity. My eyes kept darting towards the approaching bus that was supposed to be mine, but it was nowhere in sight. Finally, a small queue began to form for my bus stop. Relief washed over me. I scrambled to my feet, hoping he wouldn't follow. He didn't move at first, but as I neared the queue, I saw his head swivel in my direction. A flicker of something, desperation maybe, crossed his shadowed face. Then, with surprising agility for someone who looked like he might fall apart at any moment, he pushed through the crowd and positioned himself right behind me. My heart hammered like a trapped bird. Every instinct screamed at me to run. But where would I go? The rain wouldn't let up, and the unfamiliar streets stretched out like a maze. I forced myself onto the bus, finding solace in the crowded space. I wedged myself into a seat behind a large woman, using her broad back as a shield. The man followed. I could feel his hot breath on the back of my neck, hear the rapid rhythm of his breathing. His mumbling, though muffled, had taken on a frantic edge. The stench of sweat filled my nostrils, making me feel nauseous. This was a nightmare. I had one more bus to catch, and the thought of being alone with him again was unbearable. As the bus drew closer to my stop, a desperate plan formed in my mind. Taking a deep breath, I waited until the doors opened and the crowd surged forward. Then, with a burst of adrenaline, I bolted off the bus and into the rain-soaked streets, weaving through the pedestrians. I didn't dare look back. The pounding in my chest echoed the rhythm of my feet on the wet pavement. I reached the next bus stop moments before the bus pulled in, collapsing onto a wet bench. As it pulled away, I glanced back at the deserted street, a sliver of guilt twisting in my gut. Maybe he wasn't a threat, just a lost soul seeking solace like me. But then I remembered the desperation in his eyes, the way he'd followed me relentlessly. It was more than just seeking company. The memory sent a shiver down my spine, reminding me that some mysteries are best left unsolved. Restless engine, a haunting on the highway. The tires of my beat-up Jetta crunched on the gravel as I navigated the deserted back road. It wasn't my usual route, but a detour sign had rerouted me, promising a scenic shortcut. Now, with the sun sinking towards the horizon and an unsettling silence all around, I began to regret my choice. Then, I saw it. A lone figure silhouetted against the dying light, standing beside a dark, hulking car. It was a classic muscle car, a Chevrolet Chevelle maybe, with its hood popped open like a gaping maw. My heart stuttered in my chest. A stranded motorist in the middle of nowhere with dusk approaching? As I got closer, the details came into focus. The man was tall and broad-shouldered, his silhouette vaguely reminiscent of a 1950s greaser. He wore a faded leather jacket and ripped jeans, the kind you wouldn't see outside of an old black-and-white movie. His head was bowed, obscured by the shadow of a wide-brimmed hat. He didn't turn towards me as I approached, and a wave of unease washed over me. "Looks like you could use a hand," I ventured, my voice strained in the oppressive silence. He lifted his head then, and I almost slammed on the brakes. His face was a canvas of wrinkles, each line etched deep with an untold story. But it was his eyes that sent a shiver down my spine. They were vacant, milky white orbs staring blindly into the distance. It was as if he was looking through me, not at me. The car's engine compartment was dark, the details hidden by shadows. There was no sign of a mechanic's toolbox, no frantic scrambling to fix the problem. Just the man, his vacant stare, and the eerie quiet. An instinct, primal and raw, urged me to keep driving. But the thought of leaving someone stranded, especially on this desolate road, gnawed at my conscience. "Are you all right?" I asked again, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't answer, but a sound escaped his lips. It wasn't a word, but a low, guttural growl, like a beast stirring from its slumber. My breath hitched in my throat. This wasn't a car trouble. This was something far more sinister. Terror clawed at me as I realized the man was starting to move. He straightened his back, slowly, unnaturally, revealing a skeletal frame beneath the leathery jacket. His vacant eyes seemed to lock onto mine for a chilling moment before he took a lumbering step towards the road, towards my car. Panic surged through me. I threw the Jetta in reverse and slammed on the gas. The gravel spit beneath my tires as I screeched away, casting a fleeting glance behind me. The man was still there, in the middle of the road, his arms outstretched in a gesture that could have been begging or threatening. I didn't stop until I reached the familiar glow of the highway lights, my heart still pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The encounter was terrifying, the vacant eyes and the unnatural movements replaying in my mind like a horror movie. The next day, curiosity warring with fear, I drove back to the deserted back road. The sun was high in the sky now, casting a stark light on the empty landscape. The car was gone, no trace of the strange man or his vehicle. Relief washed over me at first, but a nagging doubt lingered. How could a car, even if broken down, vanish without a trace? Was it my imagination fueled by the eerie atmosphere? I decided to do some digging. The local library had a dusty archive section filled with old newspapers. Hours later, hunched over microfilm, I found it. A news clipping from decades ago. A car accident on the same back road I had traveled the other day. A lone driver, a young man who inexplicably lost control of his classic Chevelle, veering off the road and disappearing into the thick woods bordering the highway. The man was never found. A cold dread filled me. The vacant eyes, the car, it all lined up with the news story. But the growl? Was this the restless spirit of the missing driver, trapped in a desolate purgatory of his own making? Haunted by the encounter, I returned to the back road one last time. This time, I left a small bouquet of wildflowers by the side of the road, a silent offering for the troubled soul trapped in this endless loop of despair. As I drove away, a faint flicker of movement caught my eye out of the corner of my vision. But when I looked back, the roadside was empty, bathed in the warm glow of the setting sun. Was it my imagination again? Or did the vacant eyes seem a little less vacant? A flicker of something akin to hope briefly flicker in their depths before vanishing once more? The answer remained a mystery, but as I drove away, a strange sense of peace settled over me. Perhaps the flowers were a gesture well received, a small spark of humanity reaching across the veil that separated our worlds. However, that peace wouldn't last long. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a local news alert. It reported a discovery on the deserted back road. A classic Chevelle, half buried in the woods, its engine compartment inexplicably repaired. It had apparently been spotted by a road crew clearing debris. No driver was found in or near the vehicle. The news report sent chills down my spine. The car was gone when I left the flowers, but now it was back, fixed. Did the offering appease the restless spirit, or was it something more? Had my presence triggered a change? The questions gnawed at me. Driven by morbid curiosity, I returned to the library, searching for any further details about the missing driver. This time, I stumbled upon a faded photograph tucked away in an old town history book. A young man, with a mischievous grin and a familiar glint in his eyes, stared back at me. It was the man from the car, but younger, alive. The caption below simply read, "Local mechanic, vanished mysteriously in 1958. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. The car wasn't a broken-down vehicle. It was a prison. The mechanic, trapped in a time loop, doomed to relive the accident over and over again. The growl wasn't a threat. It was a desperate plea for help. The flowers, perhaps, had been a beacon, a sign that he wasn't alone. Now, I understood. My presence, the offering, it had sparked a flicker of awareness within the endless cycle. But the car's sudden reappearance, fixed and abandoned, it left me with a terrifying possibility. Maybe the mechanic, freed for a brief moment, had escaped his prison. But escaped to where?